great to be with you here on Friday. I'll be filling the large shoes for Dr. Newman, who's unable to join us today. I think we can all agree he has well earned some of those days not here after the last 107 days of the intensities of everything. We very much appreciate it. Look forward to him being back. Hope everybody had a productive and enjoyable week. You'll notice a few changes as of today. So the first change is we've opened this up to all staff. On our normal Tuesdays, I believe we'll sort of be dealing with, continuing to deal with operational issues and issues surrounding COVID. But on Fridays, we've changed the format of this meeting, changed the objectives of this meeting. We want to make sure that it's open to all, because we're all leaders here at Children's National in our homes and in our communities. And it really deals with the change in topic. So the topic you're going to hear about today is one of reflection on inclusion and diversity and racial justice, and an important topic with an opportunity that we have to speak to you, with you on Friday. Most importantly, these Friday meetings will be about listening. Today we have had two leaders raise their hands with willingness to share. I've spoken with them a few, and one comment was made: it's difficult to put yourself out there personally. And I admire the courage that both are showing to put themselves out personally and talk about these important issues. Look, like a lot of you, I've been following with the online, with all the media coverage, with all the things you have happening. And I'm like the first by saying how proud I am to be part of Children's National. Children's National has taken a proactive approach, a prospective approach to have listening as an organization. I want to share a couple of reflections of my own as I set the stage for our two leaders to come and share. But I have two ideas that I would like to implore from you today. So one, I think we should be slow to make assumptions. Two, I think we should focus on listening and not just hearing. When I say slow to make assumptions, they really aren't 2 points but one, but one is the absence of the other. If you make assumptions, you might be wrong. So I'll give you a few assumptions that you might make. So many of you have heard me talk about my children. Many of you have met my children because I frequently secret shop all of the wonderful services here, whether I like it or not, because I have 4 children. And to talk to them today about what's going on in the world and these important issues, you might be making some assumptions, right? Without knowing my kids, you might not know, and you might be assuming that, gosh, I'm going to be talking to 4 white kids about racial issues that they're completely unaware of. You wouldn't know that my kids happen to be white, Hispanic, and black, right? You wouldn't know that unless you got to know me, but if you're listening, you might hear it, right? If you're listening, you might absorb that information, right? When I say that this is an important topic and an opportunity for us to make a difference, you might assume that this is the first time I'm dealing with this topic. You wouldn't know that I was raised in an area known as Fifth Ward in Houston, Texas, that my mother was a public school teacher, and that I lived in an area that was predominantly not white. Right? You wouldn't know that when my youth group that was attached to my church ran out of the ability to pay for its youth minister, that was something I took on and my wife took on as a personal opportunity in our life to make a difference. So when we talk about these sensitive issues and we talk about these topics, to make an assumption that this is the first time dealing with, Daryl Varnett, though, said something that has resonated with me from the beginning of this sort of national topic of late. He said, Alec, the same topics and the same things I'm sharing with my grandsons are the same things I remember being shared with me back in the 1960s. Now, I wasn't around for the 1960s, but I can tell you that when I started working with that youth group, when I started that effort back in 1998, we were having the same conversation. And it's so disheartening to have that same conversation with my kids, right? When a lot of my kids, and sort of the examples that I would use, one of my favorite stories to tell you is one of Robert Ariano. Robert Ariano is half Hispanic and half black. He was born in Fifth Ward, in an incredibly poor area with an incredibly poor family. One thing he had going for him. Robert Ariano is what we refer to in Texas as a big dude. 6'6", 340 pounds. He's a big guy. Turned out to an opportunity to go play college football. The only place that offered him a full scholarship, which is what he required, was Abilene, Texas. To go from the transition from Fifth Ward, Houston to Abilene, Texas, required us to have a set of conversations and a set of work through things that the environment changed. And it was hard to do. The reason why I bring up Robert Ariano specifically is Robert Ariano, post-college, he didn't get to go play professionally. Nobody paid him to play, but he did use it to get a college education. Turned time to make a career choice. Robert Ariano chose to become a police officer. He now is a police officer in that same Fifth Ward, Houston, and he takes a lot of pride in his work. Takes a lot of pride in what he does. He's also the kindest, softest individual I've ever met. I worry every day with what is Robert Ariano feeling during this time? You know, when there's so many assumptions being made about what Robert Ariano does or doesn't believe or what he does or doesn't stand for. And I think we got to be slow to assume. If you're going to be slow to assume, you got to be open to listening. If you're going to stop with the information that you assume to be true, then you got to be open to outside information. There's an important difference between hearing and listening. So if you're going to make an important difference between hearing and listening, I'll use an example of mine personally. Which the other thing you might not assume is if you speak and I don't hear you, it's probably because you're on my left side. Because on my left side, I have about 40% hearing out of that ear on a good day, right? Which the analogy that I would say the difference between listening and hearing is I have a unique advantage. I'm going to share a secret with just a few thousand of my closest friends, and if any of you tell my wife, I'm toast. But reality is, if she's snoring, which sometimes she's been known to do, all I have to do is this, and I can't hear it at all. Reality is I have the unique privilege of doing this and pretending it doesn't exist. Right? There's an analogy there, and not one that was taken lightly. Right? Not all of us have the privilege of being able to do this. And if we're talking about anything that we're going to make a meaningful difference in 2020, we're going to get everyone to stop doing this. So we have two leaders today who are going to put themselves out there and who have agreed and raised their hand with an opportunity to share with you their reflections on these important topics. And with that, and then after these two, we will close our agenda today with Reverend Kathleen Ina Sternstein in a closing prayer. So with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Kathleen. Sorry.
Thank you, Alec, for your wonderful remarks. I learned a lot of new things about you, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Kerstin Hildebrand Abdikarim, and I'm going to read my reflection because it is difficult for me to share, and I want to make sure that I represent my story and my family correctly. First of all, I want to say thank you for the invitation to speak in this space. I really have appreciated the creation of this forum as one to highlight the reflections of those who need to be listened to at this time. To be honest, I'm a bit hesitant to share my life, but I hope that in some way I can add to the conversations that we're all having. And while I may not always have the correct words and terminology, forgive me, I'm still developing and learning, but this is my story. Understanding race in the U.S. is common from Germany. Unlike for others, this was not something I was able to avoid, since I married an immigrant from Somalia, and I have two beautiful and amazing Black children. I had to learn that being Black or white in the U.S. forces you to participate in a system with a long history of discrimination, violence, and racism. I had to assimilate into my whiteness, which was deeply uncomfortable and forced me to take a stand against it. It is what has guided my life and the work I do. I came to the U.S. as a student in 1978, and for the first 20 years lived in Boston. My parents are both first-generation university graduates, and I'm the oldest of three sisters, and I'm the only one in the U.S. After growing up as a military child in Germany, Boston truly became my home, since it was the first time in my life that I had lived in a place for more than 2 years. My life in Boston felt like it was divided into two distinct parallel universes. First was where I trained and worked at Boston Children's and at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. There I had a progressive career in clinical research administration with a research team making groundbreaking discoveries in leukemia and lymphoma. I was part of an Ivy League biomedical ecosystem that attracted researchers from all over the world, but with only a few exceptions was extremely white and predominantly male. When out of work, my home was Roxbury and Mission Hill, a predominantly African American, Caribbean, and African low-income neighborhood. Many of my neighbors were immigrants like me, and we shared our experiences and resources while adjusting to life in the U.S. It was during this time that I became acutely aware that even as an immigrant, my white privilege provided opportunities that my friends did not have access to. When in the late 80s, many of the neighborhood's low-income housing, originally government financed, was at risk, we organized. The community joined national coalitions, lobbied in the local and federal government in an effort to secure our home ownership and to protect our communities. Through this process, I learned from African American leaders of the Boston bus boycott who took me under their wings and taught me what it takes to engage with your community and to stand up to speak truth to power. It was those 10 years working as a community organizer that were the most formative in my life. It was also during that time that I met my husband while lobbying in Washington, D.C. He married in 1992 and very shortly thereafter sponsored 10 of his family members as refugees from Somalia when the war broke out. They joined us in Boston. Marrying an African immigrant and suddenly having a large extended family and navigating systematic racism as an interracial couple and family in Boston was extremely challenging. I cannot fully explain how difficult it is to find the words to comfort your partner who was coming as a young man from Africa and was confronted and forced to navigate a system of racism without the support of a family. It is deeply painful. It was a deeply painful experience, to say the least, and many times just left me as a loss for words. For those who know me, taking action is how I generally confront problems. But when confronting acts of racism, taking immediate action is in many situations not the smart thing to do. You need to learn how to navigate the system and be smart and purposeful to stay safe. However, what do you say when your husband tells you that his coworkers left stickers with the N-word on his locker when he started to work for United Airlines in Boston? How do you react when he stopped in broad daylight on the street while professionally dressed on his way to visit his mother, thrown against his car, threatened to be arrested because he looked like a black man they suspected of burglary? When you do speak to police to notify them of a cab driver that stole something from your luggage, and instead of speaking to you, they interrogate your husband? How do you tell your partner not to react when the police stops you or when someone makes derogatory slurs to you because you're an interracial couple? You learn to adapt to the system. You don't show affection in public. You keep your life private and within your trusted community, and you try to find the best place for your family and continue to make a positive impact. For my family, it meant leaving our jobs and friends in Boston and moving to Fairfax, Virginia, in order to give our kids access to one of the nation's best public school systems. Like many immigrants, we believed that education is the way to ensure that our kids would get a better life and future in this country. Moving to a suburb and purchasing our own home was a significant accomplishment for us. Unlike the inner city of Boston, the suburbs provided us a bubble and many privileges. However, there's no escape from systematic racism. You just face different challenges, and you're also now parents. As a white mother to mixed children, most people assume that my kids are adopted when my husband is not with us, which was very confusing and troubling for my kids when they were little. Navigating Fairfax County Public School as a parent of black children was another challenge, which I could have not managed without the mentorship of African American parents and teachers. Being blessed with healthy children who tested into gifted programs, Iman and Aziz had access to the best school resources. However, it also meant that throughout their K-12 school years, they were always only one of a handful of Black students in their program. For instance, as a result of their hard work, love for learning, and being privileged to have test preparation resources, both of my kids were admitted to Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. One of the best schools in the country, TJ has a long history. I think I was going to push it. Has a long history of legal challenges to address the lack of diversity and Black student inclusion. Of 1,800 students in the school, less than 25% as being Black. When reflecting on their time at TJ, both of my kids value their TJ education, but remember feeling extremely frustrated when the Black students were not invited by the white administration when President Obama visited the campus. They remember that when they were accepted into Ivy League and universities, several of their white classmates told them that they had been accepted by the school due to their race, not based on their academic achievement. When parents of Black students developed a TJ Prep course for high-performing Black middle school students to ensure that they had access to TJ Prep admissions, the administration and PTA shut us down when over 4 years the number slightly increased for minority students. My children tell me that it was hard for them to be the face of Blackness in a school that lacked diversity, because having Black and white immigrant parents didn't provide them with the same historical experience that African Americans have. Our shared experience as a family is that of an interracial Afro-European American family, but that doesn't mean that we are able to escape the racism in this country. Parenting Black children is beautiful, but extremely scary experience. Both Iman and Aziz decided to go to Washington University in St. Louis as urban scholars. When the unrest in Ferguson broke out after Michael Brown was killed in 2014, I made them call me every night to ensure that they were safely back in their dorm. In college, I told my 6'5" son not to wear dark hoodies when skateboarding, not to be off campus at night alone, and to always have a buddy. All of our cars have TJ Wash You and German stickers on them, hoping that when my husband or my kids are stopped, it may make a police officer think twice. My son now lives in Manhattan and has been out protesting for weeks. He tells me he's keeping safe, but I worry and I still check with him every night. My daughter, on the other hand, was so stressed at times from all of this, she decided to move to Germany for graduate school and is now out on weekends marching in Berlin for Black and brown lives in the US and in Germany. I think what I want to say here is that being white, I had to own my white identity and privilege in the society. I can see how the systematic racism has caused harm and stress to myself, my family, my friends, and my colleagues I care about. When you examine this more, holding on to racism and privilege of being white doesn't serve us as individuals, our communities, patients, or families. This is why I'm asking, in particular, my white colleagues who are listening to this. Do not only learn and listen, but become comfortable with feeling uncomfortable in conversations addressing racism. Be proactive and support your Black and brown colleagues, friends, and neighbors, and to find your own individual way how to have a positive impact at this critical time. A lot of people at Children's are working hard here how to do this and will point you to resources. I want to thank Kurt and others who have provided this safe space. Hopefully, I had something to add to this conversation. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maduperla Olutosin Hinga. Most of you know me as Tosin. I was born in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm first generation Nigerian here in the United States. I'm going to preface this by saying I don't speak for all Black people. I don't speak for all Nigerian Americans. I speak for myself. Though our personal stories of racial injustice may be similar, they are not the same. I identify as a Black, cis woman. Being Black is amazing, but it's dangerous, and I'm scared right now. If you're not scared right now, you're privileged. This is my husband, Lee. Lee is an IT analyst. He loves kickball, he loves anime, he loves everything Star Wars. He's one of my favorite people. When he's a few minutes late, I get scared. When he's out riding his bike on the trails, I'm scared. Is someone going to see him and assume he's up to no good because he's a Black man? If you don't have to worry about your husband or your wife being profiled or killed because of the color of their skin, you're privileged. This is Aiden. Aiden is my nephew. He is so loving and makes friends with anyone that he meets. He has a collection of Nerf guns and water guns and loves to FaceTime me and show me his new collection. He can only use them in the backyard or in the house for fear that someone could mistake his Nerf gun or water gun for a real gun. If a cop approaches Aiden, he has been taught to say, "Hello, sir," or "ma'am. My name is Aiden Parks. I am 7 years old. I have nothing that will harm you." If you have never had to teach your child a script to use with a police officer, you are privileged. This is me. As a nurse, I have experienced racism, a racist joke from a parent, a rude comment about those people from a physician, a question of, "Are you the PCT or the safety attendant?" from a fellow nurse when I was clearly wearing a RN certified badge. I'm not here to tell those stories today, but to the Children's National family, because we are a family, I challenge you to get to know your Black colleagues on a personal level and learn their stories. I guarantee they had many. Speak up when you hear a racist joke. Learn about your privilege and be an ally. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we go ahead to the last slide? I didn't know what I was going to hear my colleagues say today, so prayer. I was going back and thinking about what it is I have lived through and into during my life. And somehow both of you have touched on those things that touched me over the last couple of days that I would like to share with you. The phrase, waking up white, is getting a little bit of bump these days. I don't take credit for it anywhere. It was coined by Debbie Irving as the title for her 2014 book. I read it shortly after it came out, but I recently picked it up and reread it. This time I didn't have an intellectual response to it at all. I had a visceral one. I'm white. I need to wake up. I want to wake up. I've been aware of racism and opposed to it for as long as I can remember. But isn't it interesting that I can stand here and say I'm opposed to racism and not be afraid? I didn't understand my responsibilities until I remembered this particular story from my childhood related to the picture you see behind me. I was about 3 years old and I was riding on a Columbus, Ohio city bus with my mother. The seats were facing rows along the side of the bus with a center aisle down the middle. Across from where my mother and I sat, there was an African-American woman. I had not seen a person whose skin tone was any different from mine prior to this. I watched her. Eventually, I got up and I walked across the aisle and I sat down beside her. My mother observing quietly. I reached out to touch her hand and I rubbed my fingers along it. "Where did you get such pretty skin?" I asked her. Reflecting on that moment, I suddenly realized that had there been an African-American child of 3 on that bus, she would not have felt the freedom to approach my mother. Her mother might have pulled her back had she tried. I did not know it at the age of 3, but I had the permission of society to approach and to touch this woman, to ask her a personal question that could have been offensive. I only remember her placing her hand on top of mine. I don't remember her saying a thing. For years, that story was told about me and by me, with a sense of pride that, of course, I never would think poorly of African Americans. In fact, I admired their pretty skin. Waking up white is about finally wondering how that African American woman experienced that encounter. With fear, with sadness that her children couldn't be where I could be and do what I could do. Did she hope that I would grow up to make a difference? I've tried, but I've done my deeds and I have said my words from the wells of freedom that I have. I am waking up. It is uncomfortable waking up. I like waking up. Let's all wake up. These past weeks have been the wake up alarm. They have been painful for many people, but the alarm has brought with it the possibility of a dawn that can be realized. Let us be in an attitude of reverence. Holy One, give us enough mercy to truly listen, to recognize and to reduce our assumptions. Enough mercy that we may open ourselves to the stories which must be told, heard, relived, and newly understood in a wide awake world. Amen.
Okay, thanks to everyone. We're going to end here today, and we look forward to talking to you next week. Have a happy and safe weekend. Thank you.